proposal for project 3, as well as just like kind of a good practice in agile management and agile methodologies. So I know I was supposed to kind of have the midterm release today, but just been kind of slowed down with grading and interviews and different things. So I'm going to assign the midterm tomorrow. You will have until Tuesday midnight to finish it, but it's a 30-minute timed quiz again. So you really don't need to put in, or you can't put in more time than that. And in my Slack post on the announcements channel, I have like the list of things that I really want you to focus on. So hopefully that's helpful. Things like React State, JavaScript functions, things like that. I would really like, if you want something to study for it so you feel more comfortable, I would honestly just kind of look at your code and understand like why things are happening. If there were pieces of code you just kind of threw in, but you didn't really get it, then I would try like looking that up and seeing some kind of documentation on it, and that could help as well. But it is open book while you're taking the test. Dates haven't changed, same project 3 dates that I was showing you guys last class. One important thing to mention is as we're finishing grading project 2 and the interviews, I'm going to be sending out emails by tomorrow afternoon to any of you who will fail this class, unfortunately, due to the project 1 and 2 average rule. So this has been on the syllabus. I am enforcing it. That's not going to change. The only thing that I changed was like deadlines, and I tried to be lenient with that side of things. But now as we figure out the grades, I'm going to send out emails probably tomorrow afternoon. So if you don't get an email, then rest assured. But if you do, then you would have been in this rule. If I know this is kind of like a stressful thing for everybody, so if you are extra worried about this and you want to just kind of check with me, you can ask me on Slack and I can let you know early if this is something that's stressing you out, which side you're on. I may not know depending on how much of your grade is already in though. In general, this isn't something that most of you should be worrying about unless you didn't turn in like an entire milestone, or the things you turned in were like very incomplete, that type of thing. So there really shouldn't be surprises based on the work that you submitted. And the midterm, yeah, so release tomorrow afternoon, due Tuesday midnight, 30 minutes. It'll be about 15 questions, multiple choice. You can use all the Slack posts, online resources, and code that you already have, but you're not going to be allowed to ask new questions on Slack about the material itself. So anything in the past you can use, but you're not going to be able to help each other in any way or ask for help during this midterm until Tuesday. So don't ask questions on Slack about the midterm. Don't work on this together. I'm going to do some sort of analysis that I found that can compare student responses. And if I'm finding some like significant patterns that looks like people were taking it together and that sort of thing, then you will get a 0, you will get reported. This is a midterm, so I'm taking this seriously. Any questions about the midterm? As I said last class, if you did project 2 and you kind of get what you're doing, then I really don't think there's a reason to study. Okay, no questions, Samant, about the midterm. Any other questions logistically? Okay. Okay, great. So I've been talking about project 3. I'm going to just show you the specs and walk you through a little bit because things are working differently than how we've done it in the past. I haven't released these specs yet, so you're not going to see this on Canvas. I'm still finalizing things, which is why you'll probably see the link tomorrow. I'll announce it once I post it. But just to give you the full preview, due dates are the same. So you're going to have a week to do the proposal, 2 weeks to do your MVP sprint, 2 weeks to polish it up and get your final product. And then the last day of class is going to be your final presentation. And then weekly, you're going to be expected to basically hold these sprint meetings with your industry mentor and the rest of your team in order to track progress. I will actually also award prizes at the end. One prize will be the Critics' Choice, which is just me. And the other one will be the app that you all vote for as the best one. And those people will get extra credit. So group proposal, that's probably the most relevant thing right now that's coming up. So these are basically writing specs that are specific to your products that you're going to make. And these are not going to be finalized in any way. You've seen from my specs that they change over the course of the weeks after I put them out. So this is just a starting point that translates like your larger idea into a more digestible kind of plan of action with chunks broken down so that you can split up your work best amongst the team and things like that. So when thinking about the idea itself, your project can't be a clone of some like popular technology. So you can't just do Uber or Twitter or something like that. You can do a twist on one though. So I don't want you directly copying an idea, but you could do like Uber for dog walkers or something like that. And that's totally fair. Also, your project should not be an extension of project 1 or 2. So I don't want to just see tic-tac-toe, but like ramped up with a bunch of new features, or something that's using the Spotify and Genius API and allowing you to discover songs. That's kind of building off of technology you will already know. And that's a little bit unfair and also just boring. So I want you guys to get creative and think beyond the scope of what we've been talking about. I have a list of like potential technologies you can leverage, different APIs. That sometimes helps me brainstorm ideas when you see like the kinds of databases and things you can access out there. So like census data or NASA data, or being able to automatically send text using Twilio. These are all useful APIs that you could leverage when coming up with your app idea, even like Google Maps and showing maps. So you're going to brainstorm your idea next week, hopefully find some consensus between you 4, and then you're going to write up your proposal. The proposal is going to look a little bit like this. So this is basically a 2-page template of what you're going to do, and you're just going to want to take the template and then replace what I've written here with your own content. So you're going to make a copy of this and do that. It's some of it should look pretty familiar. You're going to show like what your end deliverable is, kind of like an elevator pitch of what it's going to do, a motivation of like why it's important, technical approach as far as like the architecture and the main technologies we'll use, risks that you're seeing. You're going to split up kind of the high level functionality into your 2 sprints. So again, each one is 2 weeks, and you want to come up with what is like the bare bones requirements for your MVP. And then what are like all the additional nice features that you're going to add after that. So you're really going to want to prioritize once you come up with a list of all the possible things you want your app to be able to do. You'll want to prioritize them into these 2 buckets, as well as cut them down based on what seems feasible for you guys in 2 weeks. And then here's user stories, which is like very relevant to today's topic. This is pretty much like a more specific form of the specifications we were talking about last class when we were talking about requirements engineering. So I'm going to go into this later in class, but I'm basically going to require you to write a number of these, which are basically saying what your user should be able to do from their perspective in your app. And you're going to need about like 4 in sprint 1 and 4 in sprint 2 just for this proposal. And then finally, you're going to create 3 mock-ups, which are showing what your design should look like. Of course, that can totally change, but the more you plan, the more you can kind of just test out ideas in your head. So even if it changes, at least it's like getting you somewhere in terms of thinking about it. So I'm going to require 3 mock-ups, and we're going to talk about how to make them next class. So that's the proposal. Ask me any questions, as I'm talking. The industry mentor meetings, the groups are not created. I'm going to be assigning those and posting those next Monday. So if you saw any groups on Canvas already, that was just me testing the feature out, but those are not final. I've deleted those. So the industry mentor meetings, you will also get connected with them next Monday, and you'll be expected to reach out to them to set up your first meeting with them next week, next week. And each meeting will be about 30 minutes. And among your team, each week, basically, one of you is going to put the hat of the product manager on, and you're basically going to lead that meeting. So you're going to kind of have an agenda for what you want to talk about. You're going to give an overview of the progress in this last week, see what went well and what didn't go well, and kind of adjust the plan accordingly. So this is going to be a weekly sprint meeting, and each of you is going to be expected to take on that role of product manager once. And then finally, here are like the technical expectations, I guess, for each of the sprints. For your MVP, I'm not fully defining what tools you have to use, but I'm defining some of them. You are going to need to use GitHub just because it's the easiest way for us to grade and look at your code. That's what we know best as the TAs and myself. So this doesn't have to be a repository that's in our private org now. This can be public, and it should also not be owned by our organization. So this should just be like your own thing owned by one of your group members with the others as collaborators. The reason for this is this can give you more credits when you want to do like some automation that I'm going to talk about. You're also going to use something called GitHub Projects, which is basically a Kanban board, which allows you to track progress and do things that we're going to talk about later on in class. I'm going to expect that this is deployed, of course. I recommend Heroku. I'm going to expect a client server architecture. So this kind of means you just have a client and a server. I don't really care what language it is, but again, I do recommend Python and Flask. And on the client, I recommend like HTML, CSS, TypeScript instead of JavaScript, and React. This is up to you guys, though. I'm just assuming that this is going to be what all of you have the most experience with, since you are all doing this right now. And then you'll have 2 methods of communication that you can choose between, using Socket or using basic REST APIs. So you don't have to use Socket. I'm not requiring that. In fact, if you don't need to push data from the server to the clients, like a real-time update, then I would actually recommend you to use REST APIs because they are simpler to test, and they're just kind of, in general, a little bit more sensible. So you don't need extra libraries if you don't need to do pushing. So client server, user login is another thing that I'm going to require. So somehow you should have an app experience that is unique to the user who is logging in. That's how most apps are today, so that's why I'm requiring this. Also, this adds some complexity, at least, to the project. There's 2 ways you could kind of handle this. One way, option 2, is kind of handle the email and password sort of registration and login, which is sort of what we did in tic-tac-toe, but without the password side of things. If you go that route though, then you need to do it in like an encrypted form if you're storing the passwords. And you also need to kind of handle authentication with Flask. So just some basic security constraints, which I've given some links to. But I actually recommend you go the route of using a third-party API that handles login for you. So you've probably seen in a lot of apps, you can sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook, things like that. And that actually takes away the need to do the security, the authentication, because somebody else out there, like Google, is doing it for you and checking things against their own database. So that can be a lot easier, just like any API. And I have a few links, which are tutorials about how you can set that up. If we get time, then we might actually go over this in class as well. But you probably are going to need to start looking at it yourself either way. And you're going to need to persist some data in the database. So if you're showing like a user view, you probably want them to be able to save things or add things that they can come back to. So I'm recommending use Postgres with Heroku just because it's what you know. And then finally, 3 things here. So I'm going to require unit testing for complex logic, so some number of tests. I am going to require linting and formatting, similar to what we did in milestone 3. But again, you can choose how you want to lint and format. And then one final thing, which we actually haven't done in this class before, is I'm going to require continuous integration for testing, which is basically setting up your project so that you don't have to run your tests every time you are about to like push something to your app or deploy something. So this is kind of like automated testing that is done continuously, meaning every time that you push to GitHub, then it's automatically going to run your tests. If your tests pass, then the push works. If your tests fail though, then you're not going to be able to push. So this is something you see across a lot of companies. We use this at Facebook in some form as well. And it's really useful because your tests can like flag errors that you didn't see automatically. Okay. You see it a lot on job postings. Yeah. This is not version control. It's actually, you can set it up using version control because it kind of is a feature that's provided by GitHub. But it's mainly focused more on the testing side and like kind of deployment side of things. There are a bunch of tools though. So you might have heard of Circle CI or Travis CI. Those are other tools that are used for continuous integration. In a later class, we're going to talk about GitHub Actions and how to use that. Oh, or you can do it locally with Git hooks. I actually don't know a lot about this, so that is something you could even share some resources about, Luca. Good to know. Okay, and then the sprint 2 is basically so sprint 1 is requiring all these basics, but I'm not saying how far you really have to go with it. So it could be a really simple database. It doesn't have to do anything crazy, but if it's set up and doing one thing, that's what matters. And then in sprint 2, I'm basically going to require you to add some stories, so some new features to your app that kind of add to what you have. You're also going to want to beautify the app. There are useful CSS libraries and frameworks that you can leverage that style for you if you don't want to use plain CSS and if you're not good at that. And then there's just going to be the final presentation. So I'm going to expect that everybody comes to class for that day. If you're presenting, I'm going to expect that each presentation is 2 minutes long. So super short, just kind of a demo, no slides or anything. You're just going to literally show your app, show how it works, and kind of walk us through the flow of it. And 2 group members are going to be expected to talk, and then 2 group members are going to be expected to answer questions. All right, so that is pretty much it. One other thing, the rubric's not finalized, is that there's going to be grades in this rubric that are shared across your team, and there's going to be grades that are individual. A large portion of the grades are going to be individual. So again, we're making sure that people have the expectation that they need to put in their fair share individually to the team. I don't want one person just kind of checking out for the entire semester and the other three have to pull the work. If that happens, then they're probably going to get a 0. And I say that here too clearly. One of the main penalties is if we can see based on peer feedback, based on contributions to the GitHub repo, based on things like that, that there's very unfair kind of sharing of work, then you can be penalized up to the entire grade. And you are going to be expected to write feedback about each other through both sprints, so we can kind of see what people think about each other. Okay, so that was a quick review of it all. You'll be able to read it on your own tomorrow once I post it. Any questions you guys have? Okay. Okay, cool. All right, let's keep going then. So now we're going to be talking about user stories. So this is what I'm expecting you all to write 8 of as a group for your proposal. This is a part of requirements engineering. It's just kind of a specific way of writing out your specs though. So if you remember last class, we were kind of talking about these different steps, and this kind of falls mainly under specification, where we're kind of specifying these sorts of requirements that we've gotten from our users mainly. I don't know if you guys remember this comic from one of the earlier classes, but this is kind of just showing again how a user wants one thing, and then there are so many different ways of interpreting that based on like who you are, what your role is, and the team kind of never really lines up on what they want to see at the end. And eventually, this is going to do a disservice to the user because they're just going to get some shit product that they weren't really expecting or needing. So this is kind of why we want to think from the perspective of the user and try to kind of base everything we want to do, our goals, based on what they'll be able to do with it. So user stories are kind of just like better ways of breaking down a complex product or app into a lot of different smaller features. With those features, you can then basically split that work amongst your team. You can measure how much of the work you've completed by a certain time, things like that. And it gives you a more concrete idea of your progress. Obviously, if you think about like an app like Instagram, you can't really define it in just like one paragraph and say like what Instagram can do. It'll get really messy because there's just so many possible features and flows that the user can basically take part in on that app. So you do want like kind of a more organized way of breaking that up. So that's where user stories come in. They're basically a way that you can write down like what you expect users of your app to be able to do. So I think back in lecture 2, when we were planning out our app and the kind of requirements, we were using this this sort of framework of writing it in terms of user will be able to blank. This is kind of similar to what we're going to do here. And user stories are like a very central part of agile methodologies. We haven't talked about it yet. We will next week. But you might have seen in like media or movies or shows or whatever, that people are going to have like a big wall of Post-its, and they're kind of moving your Post-its across the wall as they're finishing different parts of it. That is actually how you're going to see user stories used in Agile. Each of those Post-its maybe is like a story where they're saying like moving it from to do to done, that sort of thing. And these are written in plain English. There are other ways of doing this. If you were using use cases, this is a more structured format that could have modeling in kind of like visual diagrams, but we're not going to be doing that. So we write things here from the perspective of the end user or the customer in the project. And they focus on like what the user can actually do or see versus how that's working, and the sort of like behind the scenes technology. This doesn't mean though that like a given story is all about the front end just because it's what the user sees. So if we think about project 2, a user story could be related to like seeing the leaderboard or the rankings of everybody who has played your game. Well, that's not something that's only front end, even though it's something that the user sees on the front end. You obviously need databases and a server in order to connect all that work together. So why do you guys think that this is a common way of doing things in, I don't know, in these sorts of like modern environments? Why are we framing things in terms of a user when we write down our requirements? Any ideas? Yeah, it forces you to take a consumer perspective, Michael. He hasn't said understanding the user's experience of the product is important. Rainfa said like, so you don't lose sight of what the end result looks like. Yeah, totally. So those are all good. You definitely don't want to get lost in terms of like the implementation details and that sort of thing. Usually in agile methodologies and just kind of like the way that we think about products these days, we focus on the user end and like the value that we're actually bringing to the user. So it could be a really cool product, technologically speaking, using cool frameworks and socket and stuff. But if this isn't actually bringing important value to the user, then you're wasting your time. The goal here is to serve some need. And that's either going to get you more money, more sales, or kind of just fulfill like your mission as a company, things like that. So yeah, framing it in terms of the user definitely keeps your priorities straight. This allows you to kind of sort out your stories in terms of only what's more or less valuable to the user. And then you can make subsequent or like follow-up decisions based on your constraints. So your time or your money and things like that. But you're first starting out in terms of like what value this is actually going to bring to them. So this is the common format for this. You're basically going to say, as a user type, I can do this action in order to meet this goal. So you're just going to be playing these fill in the blanks when you write these stories. User type basically defines like who is doing something on your product. So if we look at Google Docs, then there are different roles like collaborator, editor, viewer. If we were thinking about our grocery delivery app, then there's different users in terms of the grocery store that's putting up their inventory, or the customer that's placing an order, or the driver or delivery person who is kind of catching an order and picking it up and sending it to someone. So there are different flows. Maybe your app's only going to have one user type, but even if that's the case, if it's like one role, there could still be roles within that. So a regular user versus a power user versus a new user. Those are often used as different roles. Usually you're going to see that we might have different flows, especially for new users. special things that they can do that we wouldn't necessarily want regular users to do. So first time that you go onto an app, you might see there are tutorials or like kind of a, you have finished 30% of your setup or something like that. So there's a whole separate flow for you if you're a new user, that type of thing. So that's user type, and then there's action, and this is going to kind of define, I know this is confusing, but the end goal that the user performs. So what the user is basically going to do on your app. If we're thinking again with Google Docs, then this could be creating a new document, sharing, editing, things like that. The key difference that you don't want to kind of have as your action is something that is kind of not really something that's just like specific to your UI. So clicking a button or typing in text, things like that. These are not things that actually provide any value to the user. These are kind of a means for how you can do something. So the user doesn't care that they clicked a button. That shouldn't be a user story, because if you provide that to them, we're not really framing things in terms of what is useful for them. We're just framing things in terms of like kind of mechanically what they're doing. So you wouldn't want to say click a button. You would want to say creating this or sharing this, because that's what their real intention is. And then finally, you're kind of saying in order to satisfy some goal. So the user is sharing, creating, doing different things. Why are they doing that? What do they hope to get out of that action that they're taking? So if they are opening their version history, then it's so they can see like who changed what and when, that type of thing. You want to basically make sure that the action is something that the user will actually want to do. And then the goal is like a legitimate reason for why they would want to do that. And again, we're thinking in terms of the kind of goal of what a flow is doing versus more specific, like clicking this button or scrolling, things like that. So here's some examples. As a viewer of a Google Doc, I can view public documents in order to use them for reference. So it's not really saying open up this Google Doc at this URL type of thing. We're just kind of keeping it more general in terms of the goal and why. I can view private documents that I have a link to in order to confidentially receive information. There's another one. And so on with collaborator, inviting friends to edit the document in order to have us both modify it simultaneously. So these are all kind of, again, more general and focused on the flow of the product. And you want to make sure like these are still specific in terms of the language that you use. So as a regular user, inviting friends to a doc should work so that we can work together on a project. Should work can mean tons of things. Should it work half the time? Should it work 99% of the time? Things like that. So in general, just don't use that sort of language. You can just kind of be more straightforward and say, in inviting friends to a doc will allow me to do blank. Other things with language, this will probably remind you from last class. As a regular user, I should be able to collaborate. What does collaborate mean? Do you want to kind of be able to edit together on the same page simultaneously? That could be something more specific. And then this last one here is basically, as someone who isn't invited to a doc, I shouldn't see the contents of a doc so that collaborators have privacy. Shouldn't, first of all, is like a vague term similar to the first bullet. Another thing though is that we want to frame these in terms of what value we are providing to the user. Here we're kind of giving a negative in terms of this isn't really a positive user story, because somebody who can't see something, I don't think they really care about the fact that they can't see it. So we actually want to reframe this in terms of what value this would provide to someone else. So can anybody think of like a better way that we would want to frame this for a different user that's the same feature though? So rather than the user who isn't invited to a doc, who do you think is a better user to focus in on? Who would actually see value to someone not being able to see their doc? This is for the third one. Yeah, Oscar said the one that's working. So this is actually more useful for the person who created the doc or who's kind of working on the doc, rather than the kind of millions of people who aren't able to see the doc themselves. Exactly, yeah. So Rainfa said, my document. Let's think in terms of the user who doesn't want other people to see their doc. They're going to get value from having this sort of privacy, rather than the people who are just kind of, they don't care about this doc. They haven't actually been working on it, so they don't have private access. So you might want to say something like, as a doc's creator, instead of as someone who isn't invited to the doc. The doc is only visible to myself and other users I invite in order to maintain privacy. And so as you guys are kind of writing out these user stories, you may have trouble writing out 10 of them. One thing to watch out for is that your user stories are getting too broad. You might write, as a collaborator, I should be able to invite, edit, and comment on the docs so we can work together. That's talking about 3 different features, which are going to need completely different implementations and things like that. They also are solving 3 very different goals. Commenting is for like annotating, inviting is for sharing, like privacy wise, and editing is actually editing. So 3 different goals we're talking about. If you ever see yourself kind of combining things together into one, always look into how you can break things out to their most basic feature and unit. On the other hand, you don't want to go too narrow. So there could be 2 different sorts of user stories here. One is talking about creating a document for notes so you can like keep track of notes in your class. The other one would be creating a document for project proposals so you can write project proposals. Well, we're getting too kind of into the weeds here. There could be like an infinite amount of possible reasons then why you would create a document. This is getting too narrow. So you want to take a step back and just think about like creating a document. And maybe you can just say like, in order to edit something or note something down, but you don't necessarily need to say like for what specific case, things like that. So this is a little hand wavy. It's hard to know when you're getting too broad or too narrow, but you kind of want to just ask yourselves like, can I combine things together into one goal, or should I be splitting multiple goals up? Something like that. Okay, so what we've been talking about so far, these user stories aren't, you might be thinking that they're not as specific as we were talking about maybe last class in terms of requirements engineering. Let's say like, if I want to be able to create a document for notes, how are we creating it? How do we know that we have this flow set up successfully? There's a lot of room for ambiguity there. Each member on your team could have different ideas of how that's going to look, or how they should be actually doing that. So that's definitely vague, and it's vague by design. The thing that you want to add on top of it in order to kind of narrow this down in terms of like how that'll look, is adding something called acceptance criteria. And these are basically yes or no conditions that are going to be determining whether your user story was successfully implemented. They can also include things like privacy, security considerations, and each kind of acceptance criteria should pretty much be independent of one another, which allows you to kind of go down a list and check off, like, have I done each specific thing? So this is how your user stories are going to look. You are going to have this higher level story, which is saying, as a regular user, I should be able to create a new document so I can jot down notes. That's good. Again, there's a lot of ambiguity there, because how do you create the document? How do you write down the notes, things like that. So if we focus on creating the new document, we could actually add acceptance criteria now and say, you want a button that is kind of prominently somewhere on the home screen, which allows you to create. You want to say how clicking that button is going to take you to the document in the drive and that sort of thing. You'll be shown the location if you're currently in a folder, blah, 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 as well as privacy. So like should be visible immediately, that type of thing. So for each user story, you're going to kind of want to list out, how do I know that this has successfully worked? What are the kind of conditions I would need in order to test this out later on? So on your proposal, I'm going to require you to have 8 stories, and each story is going to need 5 acceptance criteria, basically, which allows us to test this condition and make sure it's working properly when you did it. And the other thing is you can add security, privacy considerations to your user story along with acceptance criteria. So this could be something like, this document should be private, only viewable to me. Or if it's in a shared folder, there should be people that are able to see it. So if your app kind of has specific sorts of privacy, let's say that you're showing a user specific view, so other people kind of shouldn't be able to see that. So then you can say like, it's only viewable to me, that type of thing. And again, there's always a balance between being too specific and being specific. It's not something that's going to be automatically intuitive to you always, but it's just a question you always want to ask to kind of check yourself and check each other as we're writing it. So similar to last class, you wouldn't want to say something like working as expected. That is kind of, who is expecting this? What are you meaning when you say like, it should work like this? So you want to be more specific like that in your acceptance criteria. Also, you shouldn't say something like it's easily doable. So if you remember in the creating the document criteria, we're saying that this button for creating the document is prominently on the home screen. So that's a more specific way of saying that you should be able to easily create a document, because if it's prominent, then it's going to be a large button that hopefully everybody notices and can leverage. So try to think about that as well. Also, how many clicks would it take to get there? That type of thing. And yeah, so for too specific, maybe if something says like X is near the top, red, flashing, taking up 30% of the screen, that is going a little bit too far. You could simply say like it's prominent. You could simply say like it's near the top and taking up a large portion of the screen, something like that. You don't have to go too far in terms of the colors and the specific size and things like that. That's going to be something that you do in your layouts and kind of your mock-up designs, not something that you need to write out here. And those sorts of visual specifications is going to be what we talk about next class when we talk about mocking things. Okay, so now I want you guys to try this out for yourself. So we're going to do a little exercise, and this is basically your homework 18 for today, but you should be able to finish it all right now. So we're going to do this for about 15 minutes. And what I'm going to want you to do two things. So first, try to think of like some potential project idea that you would want to pitch to your group next week. It doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have to be the one you actually pitch. I just kind of want to force you to think about it and see if you can brainstorm any possibilities. So you're going to want to do that. I also gave this website, which kind of shows a lot of useful APIs. Sometimes seeing the technologies you can leverage helps you think of ideas. I know it does for me. So you're going to want to think of a potential idea. Doesn't have to be great. If you really can't think of one, then try to just take a nice spin on like a popular existing app. So Uber, Forex, that type of thing. Then I want you to think of one user story for that idea and 3 acceptance criteria, which would be how you test that story. So we're all going to do this on a doc. I'm just going to be watching and seeing like what kinds of things you guys are thinking of. And I'll give you feedback in terms of what I think would be too specific or too narrow or too general, that type of thing. So let me send this to you now. Here's the doc. I just have everybody's name here, so you can go down and find yours. Hopefully this also could maybe give people other ideas about what they might want to consider as they look at what other people are coming up with. So check the chat, go ahead and open this up. I gave an example that I just randomly thought of yesterday, and I'll make comments as I see your user stories and criteria. This is going to be graded in terms of completion, so I'm just going to kind of check through these and put your points in if you fill this out. I'll give you 15 minutes. Take the time to brainstorm. I think that itself will take the most time. You can ask me or the class questions if you're having trouble thinking of ideas. And we will do this until 10:10. Oh yeah, let me send the link to the APIs. Okay, that's in the chat. You can check that out. Kevin, there's nothing on Canvas itself. You're just going to be graded directly on if you fill out this Google Sheet. So only worry about the Google Sheet. Oh, Rainfist, try clicking enter. in the cell? Oh, that's weird. Might be my internet. And maybe the fact that there's that many people on here. Christian, nice. An app where that tells you what to wear based on weather and clothing preferences. Luca said an app to coordinate with friends when and where to meet up and hang out with location services, calendar syncing. Cool. So Luca, I'm just going to use you as an example here, but when you're saying that as a registered user, I want to see where my friends are, who's available. So I can create a group chat session to coordinate meetups. This could actually be two separate user stories. So we could break this down and think of one user story is simply seeing where your friends are and who's available. That allows you to know who's available to hang. You could then just call them up separately or text them, but you still have value provided by the app. And then the separate one could be, as a user, you can create a group chat session with certain people. And then that could be two nice features. Okay, no space in the doc. Oh, awesome. Yeah, that'd be great, Luca. That's cool that you do this already in work. Cool ideas coming up. Favoriting stocks, getting email updates, sightseeing, celestial events. Deciding on a movie. That's been useful. I've spent hours just kind of going through Netflix options rather than watching a movie with my friends. Yeah. Okay, nice. Fitness wagers, gamifying fitness. Vacation based on your moods. Okay. Local dog walkers. Mina going with that one. Nice. Yeah. Building meals. Cool, cool. Oh, interesting, Catherine. Partnering between UPS and Uber. Let me take a look, Krupesh. Okay, search up specific location around the world, see the crime data within that location. And yeah, sorry, I know this doc's probably a little bit slow and messy at the moment, but try your best. Krupesh, for your idea, I would say at least just, it can be basic right now, but if we're thinking about project 3, you would want something kind of more complex in terms of the user experience. So how can we make logging in or something relevant here? How can we save some data specific to that user? Let's say if anybody can just kind of check their location and see crime data, maybe we want to make this a little bit more complex and valuable if that is already kind of available to you. That's a good start. One other thing I kind of see is make sure you have a goal. So you can join the app and search the location. You want to see so that I can blank. So if you want to see crime data so that I can, I don't know, weigh options for my location preference or something. Another thing is you might want to separate joining the app and searching up a location because logging in or joining, registering, and searching, 2 different features, solving 2 different goals there. Yep. Nice. Thanks, Luca. I'll take a look. Similarly, Jessica, in your user story, make sure you're thinking about um, the goal of it. So if you're setting up a room that can only be accessed by my friends, what is the goal? Why do you even want that room there? Let's see yours, Christian. As a registered user, I can select whether a given outfit for a day felt too hot or too cold. I think that might be a little bit narrow. So you actually might want to generalize that in terms of what other criteria. Um, oh, okay, wait, hold on. I'm just trying to understand your idea. So is this kind of after it gave a suggestion, you're giving it feedback? I see. Okay. So I think that that's not narrow then. So the only thing you would want to add is your goal. So why would I select whether a given outfit felt too hot or too cold? So that I can receive better recommendations from the app, something like that, maybe. Kevin, you feel like yours might be lame. Let's see. It's okay if they're lame right now. I'm only giving you 10 minutes to think about it. Um, as so app that builds you meals and dinners based on preferences and allergies can give you hints on what foods pair well together and good side dishes. Yeah, I mean, I think that is totally a fair app. I see how you have complexity in terms of a user specific experience. They have their own preferences, their allergies, and the app is building you meals based on that. I also think that this exists already in terms of like, I don't know, MyFitnessPal and things, they might have options like that already. So maybe you want to think about how you can take a spin on it in some way as well. There we go. You already have a user in Jessica. And I'll make a comment on all of these after you guys write it. It'll be hard to go through all of them at the moment though. Hemant, I see you're using the Riots API for some sort of League of Legends data set type of thing. Cool. One thing though, Hemant, remember that a user story should be one specific sort of uh, story, action, goal type of thing. So right now, this is definitely going to be long. You're going to want to see how you can split this out. So logging in is one user story in its own. Choosing the hero and building that is one user story in its own. Um, this is how you can kind of split up that work and make sure that it's more digestible as well. Yeah, no, that's okay. No need to be sorry. This is kind of just a practice exercise. Cool though. I'm glad to see so many ideas already. Okay, I'll give 2 more minutes if you want to add any information, and then we'll be done. I think you're overall, I'm seeing the acceptance criteria are pretty good though. Okay. Let's see yours, Giovanni. All right, so your story we're working with, the user would be able to view public wagers, create their own, or send. Private wager doesn't have to include points. Okay, so I think that the reason why this is such a big this might need a lot of acceptance criteria is because this user story is actually too broad. So in terms of viewing, creating, or sending and receiving, those are all three separate actions with three separate goals. So when I create, I have a different intention than when I view a public one. So you'd actually want to split this out into three separate user stories, maybe only focus on viewing, and then that should make your acceptance criteria simpler as well. Yeah, of course. Let's look at yours, Barnaby. And I will comment on all of them later on today. Okay, so app idea where you coordinate study sessions with friends or strangers, picks out music, mood sessions based on the study info. Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So I like that. I think I see how you have user kind of specific user experience in terms of you would need to log in order to have some sort of profile and then coordinate study sessions with other friends or strangers. And then you have some complexity there in terms of like picking up either music. So maybe you would need Spotify's API, certain settings based on that information. Yeah, I think that's good. And I could totally see that kind of getting more and more complex. So as a registered user, I can join an existing or start a new session. Okay, so Pranavi, for your user story, I would say that you can split this up into actually a few different stories. So joining an existing study session is a different intention than starting a new one. The goal is good, so sharing the session details with my friends, that's probably why you would start a new one. And then configuring the session settings, so selecting what type of music, things like that. That's actually a separate user story there because you have a different goal where you want to kind of tailor the output of the study session versus creating a room where people can join, that type of thing. So I would actually split that up into three different ones, and that should make things simpler. Cool. Yeah, I think that is a common thing I'm seeing with a lot of people, just that make sure that your user story is broken down into just one action. A lot of these can actually be split up. This is going to be how we measure our work and our output. So imagine needing to kind of implement three things at once. It's a little bit harder to test and also to like kind of split up that work amongst people. But you'd rather want each one to be like an independent feature that somebody can be adding in parallel in your group. So the starting feature and the configuring feature can be two different things that people are working on at the same time. Okay, guys, so that's actually it for today. That is all I had for you. Go ahead and like finish that up on your own time, or if you want to stay back right now for the last 5 minutes, you can do that. And I will give you feedback on here, mainly about your user story to see that you were kind of writing it in the way that I would expect. So I'll do that later on. This is going to just be a completion grade for your homework. So have this done by next class if you haven't. And that's it for today, actually. So finish this idea on the doc, finish your midterm by Tuesday, and we're going to be starting project 3 next week. Thank you guys for coming. I'll see you next week. Have a good weekend. Bye, Luca. Bye, Yazin. Thanks. Bye, Oscar. Bye, Andre. See you, Joseph. Bye, Rainfist. Thanks, Hussein. Bye, Hamant. I'll stay back for 10 minutes if anybody has questions. Bye, Jessica. Thanks, Barnaby. Bye, Nicholas. Bye, Christian. Bye, Abhishek. Catherine, yeah, totally.
Okay, I'll just talk like this since no one's talking.
Go for it.
For the acceptance criteria, is that just for the user story or for the entire like project in general?
So this is only for the user story.
Oh, okay, then let me adjust mine. Thank you.
Yeah, so you only want to see like, if the user story is kind of like, it's just talking about what the user should be able to do in their goal. We want to know how can we test that specific story was successfully completed. So is there a page, is there a button, is this flow kind of in place?
I see. For my user story, is this like too broad, do you think?
Let's see. So for package deliveries, drivers will be able to, so this is good. You have the user type, the driver, choose to add more package routes. Requirement 40, as a registered user, you choose how many packages you want to deliver during delivery. Okay. I think, yeah, there are a couple of different things going on here. So one thing is text group page. You have the database here, so we don't need to worry about like databases or like any sort of implementation here. We only want to focus on like the user action and goal. So the driver doesn't really, do you mean like a list of all drivers possible or what?
Yeah, kind of like the person's, like the players type of thing we did for tic-tac-toe, but this time it'll be like for drivers.
Okay.
So the drivers will have like a name, the packages they've delivered in the past,
Okay.
their new routes, things like that.
Okay, got it. So those are kind of two different things then. So
Okay.
one thing would be like you are showing this kind of list of driver information. Who is that for?
I guess for like the company, so like the partnership between UPS and Uber. So like this
Okay.
is information they keep.
Okay. Okay. So then that could be kind of one story on its own where it's like, as a, let's say, company manager, I can view the list or database of all drivers and like their routes that they've kind of added, something like that. So that I can manage my team of drivers and see like how much they've been taking on, something like that.
Awesome. And then after, so if I just narrow it down to that, my acceptance criteria is just based off of that user story. So I just have to list how that's done.
Exactly. Yeah. So what would be an example of like how you know that you successfully show this list, basically?
Okay, so I can just have them like view like a table or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could say, this is like how you can test that this is working. So table view on main page with driver information, 2 columns with this information, something like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Hey, Jay, let me take a look. Okay, so professors will be able to log in on faculty portal to create a quiz. Students will log into student portal to take a quiz. Okay, I think you are approaching that correctly. These are 2 different user stories because we're dealing with two different user types, goals and actions. So the professor is creating a quiz so that they can share it with the students to take it. The student is taking the quiz in order to kind of whatever, get their grade. One thing that you actually can break this down even further is into 4 stories. So logging in is a separate action with a separate goal from creating a quiz. I'm logging in so I can access my app and the portal, but I'm creating the quiz so I can create a specific kind of test for my students to take. So I would actually split it into 4, 2 different